Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so this will be part two, basically, talking about this Horizon 2059 cockpit incident where somebody tried to sabotage the aircraft by grabbing onto the fire handles in the cockpit, and basically could have shut down the engines to this Embraer 175 twin jet. Okay, this almost killed over 80 people. Okay, or at least it put their lives at serious risk. Okay, this was a jump seating Alaska Airlines pilot, I guess a first officer, Alaska Airlines first officer, who was off duty and who was a jump seat rider on this Horizon 2059, and basically got his hands on or tried to get his hands, or started pulling the actual fire handles. And that could have been very serious. Okay, so what I'd like to do in this video, since this is part two, is I'd like to kind of talk about how I look at mental health in aviation. All right. And to kind of talk about, what are some possibilities of maybe ways that the aviation industry, the commercial flying industry, how commercial aviation could maybe start addressing better just the broad spectrum of mental health issues that affect pilots. All right. Now, I think everybody's going to be afraid to touch this. All right. Because, commercial aviation is a highly unionized industry. Okay. And it's highly regulated. And I think the airlines themselves have to be really careful because, putting anything in the spotlight, anything that casts even the slightest shadow of a doubt on aviation can seriously affect the business of any airline. Okay, so I mean, this is delicate from every side. Okay, and I think it's hard to say if this is maybe another Colgan moment, like after the Colgan 3407 incident, how there was just this radical change, and being a little stricter, and requiring more experience to even fly with a regional airline. Where anyway, the bottom line is, if this is going to become a big deal, the fact is, I think this is going to scare a lot of people, all right, including the airlines themselves, because we already have an airline shortage. We already have an airline pilot shortage, okay. And the bottom line is, I do think that mental health is an issue. Okay, there's no question. Now, specifically with this Horizon 2059, okay, I'm going to go ahead and say this is probably more of a psychotic kind of a sudden onset, spontaneous onset, acute mental symptoms. All right. This could be caused by a seizure. Okay. If somebody doesn't have any history of psychosis and is basically a sane person, doesn't have any bipolar, depression, whatever, and they just suddenly have just a spontaneous, acute, mental symptoms, whatever, that could be a seizure. Okay, it could also just be spontaneous psychosis. You'd have to look at this. Alaska pilot, Joseph Emerson. You'd have to look at his personal life. Look at maybe did he have a lot of debt? Did he have any issues with his marriage? Was he maybe getting into gambling? Maybe having some kind of personal crisis? Could he have been under maybe increased stress because he had spent so long flying Airbuses? And came from Virgin America basically, and was just very recently fully assimilating into the real Alaska Airlines. The Boeing, basically flying, transitioning very just at the last minute into the 737. So maybe was he under maybe just the stress of maybe kind of assimilating and fully assimilating into the actual Alaska culture. And maybe there was attitudes. I don't know. I know in American Airlines that there may have been some attitudes about like people coming from America West, or, the TWA or whatever. Whenever post-merger, you never know if there's maybe some unspoken friction, especially in that final step of coming from the Airbuses to the Boeing. Maybe something about the culture, the stress, the difficulty of flying a Boeing 737 compared to the Airbus. Okay, you never know. Maybe just little things, could have been just sort of increasing the baseline stress level, that just enough so that at some point it's like blowing an aneurysm. You never know when you're just gonna lose it, And anyway, but the point I want to make is that the way I look at aviation, okay, I don't think we should just be looking out just for the most extreme psychotic breakdowns. Okay, I think we need to look more broadly. Okay, and I think the scope of what we need to be looking at with mental health in aviation is also, let's say, pilots showing up with residual blood alcohol. Okay, because it's not like, okay, theoretically, who knows how many times it happens. Okay, we only see, like, every couple of months we see like a pilot getting stopped at the gate, having a blood alcohol level, and we think, oh my god, we catch them maybe once every 2 months, but those are the ones we catch. How often do pilots actually get into the cockpit with a blood alcohol level, a residual blood alcohol level, and actually end up flying and nobody says anything, nobody notices anything? It's probably got to be at least twice as much as the ones that get caught. You have to assume that. That's just realistic. That's just statistics. So, I mean, these things do happen. And then, of course, I mentioned in the last video the United 455, basically a female captain who was in the midst of a very stressful divorce, apparently. And she ends up showing up late to the flight dressed in civilian clothes and goes on a rant on the intercom. Or I guess she was actually speaking face to face with the passengers and basically confronting them and just ranting, basically. And so, is that psychotic? No, it's not psychotic, but it's definitely mental, psychological. Okay. And it definitely shows somebody who's not in condition to be flying an airplane. Okay. So these are the ones that end up making the news. But how often does a pilot actually get and kind of mask their symptoms and kind of mask their stress and just kind of go through the motions, maybe not having a very good day, maybe having personal issues, and really isn't really in the best condition? How many times have we heard the hot mics from Southwest Airlines? Okay. Where they end up just, I mean, I'm sorry, I understand pilots, they can have their private moments and everything, but some of the hot mics I've heard from Southwest, I don't know. I mean, I think it shows people that are, that one coming out of California, there was a hot mic, Southwest hot mic, where he was just like, just going on this rampage about, stupid Californians and their Priuses, and you got to be rolling coal and all that. But he sounded a little bit on edge to me, and so bottom line is mental health. As far as I'm concerned, mental health is an issue whenever you're in a cockpit and you even have, let's say, average mental health. Okay, because I think average mental health is not good enough to be a pilot. I think pilot requires an extra edge, and you got to be really kind of above average mental health, and even lapsing into average mental health, let alone below average mental health. I don't think that's the standard we want, And I think, frankly, most pilots really do have way above average mental health. At least that's the experience I had from being a pilot myself and a flight instructor. Okay. So basically, I think we should kind of broaden the scope of what we consider to be mental health issues to include that lapse of judgment, okay, of people who have residual blood alcohol or even the doubt of having residual blood alcohol and just kind of rolling the dice and just showing up. I know it's not a lot. I'm sure it's probably not even 10%, but it's probably some little percent of pilots that actually end up doing that. And, even that small percentage of people, you add to that the small percentage of marginal pilots who are marginal in situational awareness, maybe marginal in confidence, maybe marginal in skill, maybe insecurity, whatever, just all, maybe pilots that are very good pilots, but maybe they have kind of edgy personalities. Just that little 5%, 5%, 5%, the little 5%, the little tiny percents at the bottom, they all add up to a pretty big percentage of mental health issues. And, we don't have to look very far. I mean, like I said in the last video, you have that recent United parking lot incident in Denver where you have a captain in uniform who just can't handle the pressure anymore. He's stuck in a line trying to get out of the security gate in the parking lot. He ends up just walking out with a hatchet and just attacking the gate. And then as far as I'm concerned, I'm just going to say it, I think some of the actual aircraft accidents that are called pilot error, like say the Colgan 3407 or the Atlas 3591 in Houston, and I will say the FedEx 647. Okay, FedEx flight 647 was an MD-10 landing in Memphis, okay, in 2003, right? And that ended up, a hard landing. I mean, with the MDs, the MD-10s, MD-11s, the problem is you get a high descent rate, and you maybe try too hard to flare. Basically, that typical thing where you get that bad bounce, and we saw in Tokyo, with the other FedEx, and there was in Newark also. That you get a bad bounce in an MD-11 or an MD-10, and that's pretty bad. Pretty dangerous. It's kind of a tricky airplane to fly, so you got to be pretty sharp. And so, I think the FedEx 647, I think, as far as I'm concerned, that had to do with a first officer who was flying with a check airman because she was kind of under scrutiny for her flying skills. And apparently she had some personal issues. As far as I understand, she may have had a pending DWI or some, personal issues. And it turns out she was very marginal with her flying skills and, basically flipped an airplane, or at least lost control of the airplane, bad landing. And recently we've seen with these recent like IOE situations with Delta and United, where you have these IOE pilots that are kind of marginal, and they're making bad landings, putting on the brakes too hard, burning tires, landing too hard, porpoising, PIO, structural actually causing structural problems. So as far as I'm concerned, even marginal pilot skill, I think, even marginal pilot essay, just not having the edge, not having that real extra edge, I think that is also a mental health issue. Okay, so you add the people that take the risk with judgment, with the residual blood alcohol, maybe marginal pilots, people that have low confidence, that just don't have the edge to fly, it's hard to talk about because, I haven't flown in a long time, but I remember from my days as a flight instructor, multi-engine flight instructor, instrument flight instructor, and also as a Part 135 pilot in Alaska, flying pistons, but still in really, you had to be kind of have your edge to fly over there. And basically I can remember just a whole range of pilot skill, right? And especially as an instructor, I noticed that people had a lot of experience riding motorcycles, okay? People that had certain life experience, maybe good with guns. I'm sorry to say, I don't like guns, but people that just have that extra edge, like playing pool, people that just have a second nature, or even people who play instruments that just really have that fine sense of being really in tune. You can really see the difference in flight training, and then later when you see them actually, making it all the way to being a professional pilot. Just different levels of edge. And obviously you can have a lot of edge, and you can also have a really edgy personality, right? So it's a big picture, the perfect portrait, the perfect mental health profile for a pilot probably doesn't have to be the actual best pilot in terms of, raw skill, but it has to be pretty good. You got to have a combination of edge and also somehow have sanity, and then combine that with what are your life situations, what are your life circumstances. And basically, there's just a lot of ways that either a substance abuse issue, or maybe just stress management, or just not being in a good mood, or just whatever, can create situations where you have problems. Now, I'd like to pay kind of extra attention to how very marginal pilot skill, I think, is a mental health issue, right? I mentioned the FedEx 647 because that was a pilot, a female pilot for FedEx who had personal issues. Apparently she had issues, I think DWI and maybe some other personal issues. I don't know if finances, I have to do a little more research. But apparently she had not only issues with her flying skill, but also her personal life. And I think they were giving her like extra time with a check airman, I think, because I guess she wasn't flying very well, is basically what was happening. And I guess it was like her career was on the line, her job was really on the line. And she was making a landing at Memphis. And I think it's partly on the check airman for maybe not noticing that she wasn't really flying a stable approach. Okay. And so, I'm going to put some fault on the check airman, because maybe in a way he kind of wanted her to have a bad landing, and maybe they were trying to get her out, and maybe, who knows if they were giving her the right coaching. And so that's also a factor. But the bottom line is when your skills are marginal, okay, let's be honest. You're going to feel insecure. Okay, you're going to feel insecure, and I can remember, I always thought my skills were actually not that much. I think I had pretty good hand skills in flying planes, so I never had that insecurity of not feeling like I could fly. I did make a few mistakes in a few check rides, and boy, that made me feel terrible. I'll tell you, I would think about those things for years, just small mistakes, And so I try to put myself in the position of somebody who really is underperforming, like say, let's say with check airmen, or with check rides, and maybe having like a lot of oversight, and sort of being almost on probation, for having, maybe losing their job, having their job at risk. And so if anybody does have, like, say, marginal skills, and they're sort of being watched for it, that's got to be a lot of mental stress. And I think that needs to be considered a mental health issue. um, because the result often, like, say with the Atlas Air 3591, you have somebody with marginal skill, okay, who has very limited or very unstable situational awareness, all right, and really doesn't have the edge and the full command, and the full sense of the airplane, even when the airplane starts becoming upset, right? And that's the thing, when I was teaching multi-engine, flying multi-engine instructor, I remember there was a big difference between how different pilots would react to having anything asymmetrical with the two engines. And so it's kind of interesting, people who ride motorcycles, who just kind of have that situational edge, as soon as the nose would start to deviate, even if you just lost a little bit of power on one engine, some people just nail their heading, basically, where they don't get a lot of like yaw oscillation, because they just have such an instinct to keep, just they just catch things at the millimeter level. Whereas other people, you end up with a lot of oscillation and stuff, and even experienced pilots. And I just think that it's just kind of an uncanny thing that has to do with, like, people who play pool better, who shoot guns better, who ride motorcycles better. Some people just have an edge. Okay. And I think when you're flying an airplane and you kind of just don't have an edge in those basic flying skills, to me, that explains the Colgan 3407. Because, you can take the icing, whatever. It's clear, looking in retrospect, the icing didn't cause the stall and the crash of that I think it was a -8 Colgan 3407. What it really was a guy who didn't have the edge on his airspeed. Okay. And it's just one of those things, flying an approach, configuring, changing the gear, changing the flap settings, changing power settings, who knows if he was correcting as far as glide slope, but basically just not having the edge on airspeed, right? And just letting the airspeed get too low. And then in the correction and trying to correct, basically just losing it, and, I put that in the same category as the Atlas 3591, a guy who just didn't have the edge in terms of piloting, and something abnormal does happen, maybe accidentally pressing the toga, getting some weird sensations of acceleration, pitch up, but just having this feeling that he was in a stall when there was nothing to indicate that he was in a stall. Okay. And you could just argue, like, what happened, what kind of training. But bottom line is that some people have enough of an edge, they could notice and they could tell the difference, even if they felt, vertigo, or they felt spatially disoriented. And the same thing with the United 1722 out of Hawaii. I can't remember which island of Hawaii, but it's a Boeing 777. And you had a captain who had a lot of experience in the 777, but that was as a first officer, and he had spent a lot of time as a captain in Airbuses. So he was really coming back to 777 after a lot of time kind of not being, like, really tight and sharp in that aircraft. And sure enough, he calls for a change in the flap setting, right? And, this is what I noticed as a pilot, even way back when I was flying, people who are sharp, anytime you make any change in the cockpit, anytime you're moving a gear, or you're changing, like, say, a fuel tank, or moving a flap setting or whatever, you're sort of waiting for something to be changing and sort of feeling how it changes and sort of anticipating, right? And so when you change the flap setting, he was expecting the first officer to skip a notch of flaps, right? And who knows if he called it out precisely. He may have called it out wrong, and maybe the first officer actually moved the flap as he heard the captain, But the bottom line is that when you ask for a change, you almost have to sort of be expecting something weird to be happening in the change, right? And so I think other pilots, when they noticed the speed tape didn't adjust the way they expected, for skipping a flap setting, basically, as they're climbing out, I think another pilot would say, "Oh, that must have been he put the flaps wrong," kind of knowing it as it's happening, right? But this guy got kind of caught off guard, kind of like the Atlas 3591, okay, the Conrad Aska, basically that first officer from Atlas 3591, just kind of thrown off by the sensation of something unexpected happening. In that case, with the toga going off when he's in turbulence and in IMC. And I think similarly, turbulence IMC with the United 1722, and basically something a little abnormal with the flaps, kind of not getting the sensations you're expecting, seeing things in the speed tape that don't look right, and just having a second of not really being sharp, and just kind of having the, how would you say, not forgetting the basic flying principles, which is pitch, basically pitch, airspeed, and don't be unstable in pitch, right? So because both of these aircraft, both the United 1722 and the Atlas 3591, they ended up getting radically pitched down, or at least too much pitched down, causing instability, right? So I think a good pilot is just a little sharper. And so, in my opinion, I see that as mental health, because it has to do with the overall readiness and awareness, and the overall fitness to be and the skill to be truly in command of a situation, right? So, and you can see lapses in that when it comes to, like, say, flying skill, like marginal flying skill, like you're not really mentally really in command of the aircraft, or in terms of basically your skill, mental and skill. And then the other thing too is when you have little lapses in judgment, all right, that will allow you, to make marginal decisions. Okay, even though you may be a very good pilot, making marginal decisions about maybe just kind of rolling the dice on whether your blood alcohol level is really legal, or having doubts about it, right? Or maybe making marginal decisions about flying in weather where you end up caught in a hailstorm, and you end up in those terrible accidents where you just make a kind of weird decision, or you don't know how to use the radar. You don't really play with the angles of the radar and really know how to use the radar, and you end up flying straight into hail, or whatever. So I think it's easy to call those like technical skill issues or technical training issues, okay, but I think it helps to see them as mental health issues as well, because I think mental health, instead of looking at mental health as, oh, is he depressed, oh, is he stressed, oh, is this guy bipolar, or is he psychotic, I think mental health for pilots should mean how sharp, how comfortable, how what is what's the level of sharpness, what's the level of being really in, like, ahead of the plane or not behind the plane, because arguably what happened with the United 1722 is the captain was a little bit behind the situation. And if he had a little more radar, he probably could have seen the speed tape moving like he didn't expect. And he could say, yeah. Looked at the flap panel and say, no, I meant flaps 5 or flaps, whatever flaps he called for, or flaps 10 or flaps 5. Anyway, but those kind of things, or like, say, the Colgan, like just nailing airspeed and just not letting the thing get so unstable that you end up getting into gross, having to do radical things to correct. And then the Colgan also too, the first officer should have been a little sharper, because she actually retracted the flaps when he was in critical airspeed. So that would, exacerbate the imminent stall condition. So I look at, I think if we could just broaden our sense of what we consider to be mental health, okay, so that we can look at mental health in terms of, just judgment, and so that the standard for being a pilot can be considered not just having an absence of oh, okay, he doesn't have bipolar, he's good to go. He doesn't have psychotic, he's good to go. No. The standard should not just be that you don't have psychosis, or you don't have depression. The standard should be, are you sharp? Are you above average? Okay. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to be snobby about it, but I think part of the problem, I think, is the same problem we have with guns in the United States, which is that we have this kind of weird attitude that you don't want to be too cautious about guns, or maybe make guns seem too dangerous, because then that'll start to infringe on some basic value we have as Americans, something about freedom, something about, not infringing on people too much. And so I noticed this when I was flying too, is that there was always this kind of reinforcement of the idea of how safe flying was, how safe it is. And it's safe because it's only safe if you have really good people, operate, like, say, mechanics, pilots, air traffic controllers, whatever. I mean, that's what makes it safe, because flying in a sense is inherently on the edge. You take, for example, the FedEx crashes, with their MD-11s, the hard landings, the bounce landings, the PIOs on landing, and basically the FedEx 647, the MD-10. When you're in those critical phases of flight, just something simple like a high sync rate, as you're about to go into the pre-flare, or flare, in the pre-flare and flare, like a high sink rate, just something kind of just a borderline high sink rate, you can start to get dangerous really quick, you know? And also, like say with the recent Alaska Airlines, the landing gear strut in California, I think it was John Wayne Airport, whatever. Now granted, the weather was terrible, and they said, somebody said on some YouTube video that like the winds were like calm. No, the winds. I mean, even if the winds were momentarily calm in some places, you could tell that was like the residue from a hurricane. And I'm sure the winds were all over the place. And who knows, maybe as they got into maybe kind of a high flare, maybe the wind kind of dropped, they got a shear to tail, or they got a loss of a headwind, and they just kind of maybe flared just a little bit and just kind of dropped it, And so I have, I don't know if that's really mental health. I think that, well, it may have been mental health in the sense that, you're coming in with weather that's kind of challenging, and, whenever anything happens, even at the end of the flare, there's always an opportunity to go around, if you feel like it just hasn't been set up, if the landing hasn't been set up exactly the way you like it. So if there are any other extraneous factors related to maybe pressure to maybe not have to go around, maybe something about the airport closing and maybe landing after hours, or whatever kind of stress was there, those are mental issues. Okay. And I think, it's not like you want to have absolutely perfect judgment, but you got to have pretty reasonable judgment. And there are certain critical phases of flight where, some people just have just a better edge. And I think part of mental health is not just, okay, are you not alcoholic? Do you not have a blood alcohol? Do you not have depression? Do you not have psychosis? But also to consider as part of the mental health profile, how sharp, because sharp has to do with confidence. Okay. And some people just are sharper. And also, like, what about false confidence? So it's like having genuine confidence that comes from being truly sharp. Okay. And I think that's kind of the mental health portrait we need to be looking at. So I think if we're going to look at mental health, honestly, in aviation, we need to look at marginal pilots, because they're going to have more opportunity to feel insecure and to feel sort of behind the airplane. Right. And so, yes, I absolutely think, things like psychosis, things like depression, we definitely want to have our eyes out for that. But also, we need to be looking at, marginal pilot skill and the insecurities that go along with that, because, I see a lot of incidents happening. And also, like, even like judgment calls, like getting cleared to line up and wait when you have another airplane on relatively short final. Okay. And I've seen a couple of these incidents that I think, like say the Austin situation where you have, I think it was a UPS MD-11. I think it was UPS, and I think it was an MD-11, but it's basically on short final, and you have a Southwest that basically takes the runway and maybe has a little delay getting off, and the two aircraft kind of have a loss of separation, on the runway path. And basically, you have to ask, even mental health, like, do I always have to automatically accept a clearance? If I have the situational awareness to know another aircraft is on short final, you always have a moment, even though you're cleared to line up and wait, or cleared to take off. You always have the option to say, you know what, we can wait for a second. The weather's, with the weather the way it was, how close on final that other aircraft was, or maybe just even having a doubt that you're going to get off quickly if you're actually cleared to take off. Just little tiny things. But that's why I think that the mental sharpness required for flying an airplane, professionally, or even private, even Part 91, just recreational flying. I think we need to look at flying, I think, as a dangerous activity, but dangerous in a good way, like, take it on, but that it, not to be discouraged, but just to take it on as dangerous, but with the idea that you have to have really extra sharpness in the same way as like riding a motorcycle, and so I think that, the level of sharpness, the level of being above average, okay, in situational awareness and skill and just command, basically, I think that needs to be combined with other mental health issues as the complete mental health picture. So it's not just, whether you're an alcoholic or whether you're depressive or whether you're psychotic. It's also, just a certain level of sharpness. And so, we need to raise awareness about that. And then, I guarantee you that's going to be a political problem because it's such a heavily unionized profession, and also the airlines themselves. They're not going to want to do anything that casts a big shadow or a big scandal on mental health. So it is a big issue. And anyway, hopefully we can talk more about it. Thanks.